Edmund, you may take the floor.
We've reached the fork in the path. To the right, there's a cliff edge. In the center, there's a brick wall. To the left, there are open fields. The choice this country and this city face is the same. It is a choice not only about our values of community and freedom, but also about our very survival as a civilization. By voting Labour, we mean voting Labour in general, regardless of tactical considerations. Tactical voting takes place on a constituency-by-constituency basis, and those present will be voting in a great variety of constituencies. So I take the motion as an issue of what party we would like to be in government, regardless of tactical issues. While I argue that the same old Tory Lib Dem policies will lead to climate chaos, social alienation, and economic exploitation, a Labour government would steer us towards survival, community, and freedom. Here's why. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change reckons we have 12 years to halve global carbon emissions. The alternative is 2 degrees of global warming, causing heat waves, extreme drought, and if we reach 4 degrees, the expansion of Saharan deserts to Europe and the forcible migration of people to Canada, Russia, and the southernmost parts of Latin America. So why are global emissions still rising, given what we know now? First, billionaires, as one study from Benjamin Page and colleagues shows, don't care nearly as much about the climate as everyone else. So long as we're run by governments that, constrained by their billionaire donors and an outsized financial sector, cut both taxes for the rich and public service funding, there's no hope of changing a thing. Yes?
Is not the Labour Party also run by its very rich trade union donors who would rather keep their members' jobs than do anything about climate change?
Thank you for the question. I think that trade unions are, for their members, remain essential features of our society, as shown by the university strikes at the moment. There are ways in which workers, as studies suggest, can ensure that they get higher wages overall. But I agree it is essential for parties to be democratic, and that is essentially what Labour tries to be through giving its members a say in electing their leaders, such as the present one. And second, no thank you. Second, democracy is national. But climate change results from a global economy spiralling out of control. We need transnational and ultimately global democracy to fight this crisis. So what party in the UK wants to take back control from the billionaires and help create international political structures for combating climate change? That's right, Labour. Labour wants economic redistribution and a green industrial revolution at home, and would be able to legitimate political integration on a European and someday global level. Whenever liberal centrists try to justify political integration by privatizing stuff, they fail. Just look at the violent reaction to Macron's fuel tax and to labour market reforms in France. Imagine the reaction to a Lib Dem government whose fiscal rule of a historically unprecedented budget surplus requires more austerity than the Tories. But just as governments in the 50s and 60s used public investment to increase growth and reduce inequality and debts, Labour wants to tax the rich, invest £500 billion in decarbonised growth, and participate in the UN's Green Climate Fund to help poor states decarbonise. Labour is uniquely up to the task of helping steer us from climate anarchy towards survival, yes.
There are many other parties, in fact, almost every party has a green policy. Are you going to engage with those policies, or are you merely going to detail Labour's position?
I think it's essential, thank you very much for the point, that we aim for the ambition that is most effective at tackling the problem of climate change. And unfortunately, while the Lib Dem target for carbon neutrality is 2045, and the UN has given us till 2030 to halve global carbon emissions, and the Tories are 2050. The Labour target is 2030. That is what we need to fight climate anarchy. No, thank you. There's another reason for voting Labour besides survival: community. Margaret Thatcher famously said there is no such thing as society, and she was true to her word, reducing taxes on the rich and eroding the welfare state and labour unions. As a result, people feel more alienated than ever before. Without strong unions and a strong welfare state, people are left at the mercy of market forces. Karl Polanyi, writing towards the end of the Second World War, had seen this all before. It was called the 1920s. The New York stock market crash followed the 20s era of deregulation and rising inequality, leading to a depression that fueled the rise of fascism. This was an extreme example of the surest pattern of modern history. Whenever markets are let loose from social and political constraints, they ravage every community they meet, producing commodity bubbles, economic crises, and what Polanyi called counter-movements, or drives by people to re-embed markets in society. There are right-wing counter-movements which try to make capitalism more nationalist, racist, or authoritarian. And there are left-wing counter-movements which blame unfettered capitalism and say the economy really does need to be controlled by the many, not just the few. Like when Labour Prime Minister Clement Attlee, despite Tory objections, created the National Health Service out of the ashes of the Second World War. The centre-ground establishment produced this crisis, so the question is, which anti-establishment choice do you choose? Nationalism, authoritarianism and alienation, or cooperation, democracy and community? Labour is both the best and the only alternative to the failed status quo. Survival or chaos, community or alienation, the sensible choice seems obvious. Why would Labour be the moral choice? Freedom. Here's why. Capitalism has developed technology to an unprecedented stage. In antiquity, most people were chattel slaves, working for their masters in exchange for food and shelter. But in the early modern periods, smaller population sizes and expropriation of common land forced many peasants to become wage labourers, shifting from chattel slavery to wage slavery. It's still slavery. As an employee, you still spend all your day slaving away at economic tasks, but you're given a wage in return for your labour. You become a wage slave, yes.
Forgive me if I'm wrong, but are you actually comparing having a steady 5-day-a-week, 9-to-5 job with the slave trade, with slavery and antiquity? If you are, I suggest that's not a very helpful comparison to make.
I think chattel slavery is so much worse than wage slavery, so I fully take the point that it is infinitely worse in many respects. But I still think that, as Aristotle pointed out, true freedom means having leisure time for meaningful activity like contemplation, this discussion, music, or art that would never sell in a market, but gives you personally meaning. Without leisure time, we aren't free. And with incomplete leisure time, we have none, as many exhausted working people bombarded by marketeers now spend all their non-work eating crisps or watching Netflix. Today, we work and play in slavish ways. Labour will reduce working time from 5 to 4 days over a 10-year period. We'll also give people a raise. As wage increases speed up automation, in due course, Labour's economic policy may allow everyone to receive a universal basic income, allowing them the choice over whether to work or not. Whether that happens in the next few years is unlikely. But in the long term, this may be a possibility raised by increasing automation by raising wages and increasing overall economic growth, giving people the freedom to work or not. We could all be free to love not money and status, but wisdom and community. That is the true meaning of freedom. It has no price tag, but it does have a Labour sticker. So the choice is clear. To the right, there is chaos, alienation, and exploitation. In the centre, there is more of the same. So the question, should this House vote Labour, is hardly a question at all. I think we know by now that the answer is crystal clear, if only we have the courage to shine a light on the open fields beyond. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your speech. We'll now be moving to the first speaker on side opposition, Cary Godsal. Cary is a first year studying history and politics at Peterhouse and is one of the union's competitive debaters. Cary, you may take the floor.
My case today is very clear, and that's that the Labour Party is dysfunctional, delusional, and utterly unfit for power. And I think that I speak for many when I look at the two main parties and their leaders, and I feel utterly revolted by the choice that I'm being presented, by the inadequacy of the options available. However, it's not enough for me to say my opinions on the Labour Party per se. I need to engage in a comparative. Because if you don't vote for the Labour Party, you'll vote for someone else. So unlike the Prime Minister, I'm going to look at the other parties and why specifically you should vote for them rather than the Labour Party. And it's for this reason that I propose tonight that we should vote Liberal Democrat in the next election. They are the party that will keep us closest to our natural allies, that will preserve our economic foundations, and that will launch the most ambitious environmental programme of any party. My speech is going to revolve around three main components. Firstly, I'm afraid on Brexit and on the lack of leadership from the Labour Party, and funnily enough, from the lack of any mentions by the previous speaker. Secondly, I'm going to look at the post-Brexit world, because that has to happen at some point, and look at the economic policies that Labour proposes. And lastly, I will examine anti-Semitism in the Labour Party and the lack of moral leadership shown by Jeremy Corbyn. But first, some extraneous rebuttal. Because it was interesting that the last speaker spoke a lot about climate change and about how the Labour Party was the most ambitious party. Because funnily enough, before I came here, I did my homework. And I looked at the two parties' manifestos, and I looked at the pledges, and I compared them. So let's have a look, shall we, at what the manifestos say. The Labour manifesto says the following: nearly 90% of electricity from renewable and low-carbon sources by 2030. The Lib Dem manifesto, by contrast, says that 80% of electricity from entirely renewable sources by 2030. It is the Lib Dems that have the most ambitious, comprehensive, and detailed plans as to how to deal with climate change. The last speaker asked, how will the Lib Dems do this? Funnily enough, it's in the manifesto. Amongst other things, we're going to do things like forcing every company that's listed in the United Kingdom does business in the UK to sign up to the Paris Climate Agreement, for instance, amongst other things. All our responses will be interwoven throughout the rest of my speech. But let's be clear, firstly, that Brexit is, I would say, the greatest foreign and domestic policy challenge facing this country since the Suez Crisis. And the lack of leadership from the Labour Party is telling. I don't think I need to explain why Brexit is problematic, but if I do, I'll do it now. That tearing up Britain's closest security, political, and economic relations in the vanity dream of trading with some small countries half across the world like New Zealand is probably not an optimal strategy. But I think this election is our last chance to remain in the EU and to repair our European relations. And that voting Liberal Democrat is the only way to ensure this. Because let's have a look at what the Labour Party policy is on this. It's the following. They're going to negotiate a Brexit deal that protects jobs, workers' rights, and the environment, and then put it back to the people for a final say. I would say that this policy of neutrality is utterly unacceptable when facing the biggest issue of the decade. Being neutral in the face of impending disaster is to be complicit in that disaster. But moreover, this sudden neutrality follows months of creative ambiguity and uncertainty. The fact is this: Corbyn and most of those around him don't want to stay in the EU. They want to leave. And as a result, a Labour government is not one that's going to campaign vigorously for remaining part of the EU. But let's move on to the claim that we can negotiate a credible deal within 3 months. Because I'm a little confused, I have to admit. We're given no reason as to why the EU want to reopen negotiations for the third time, and why they will then give us loads of new concessions that will give us all the best bits of the EU and none of the bad bits. They need to really engage with the reality of what these negotiations will look like, because I think the reality is that any new Corbyn deal will be very similar to the one that Johnson has already obtained. And I think there's therefore an issue, right? Because let's say following this negotiation, Britain then votes to leave, at which point you've wasted another 6 months and you've created even more uncertainty. Congratulations. You're as bad as the Conservatives. Or, in the case that Remain wins the referendum, you get a worse outcome than the Liberal Democrats, because you've wasted another 6 months and you've also created uncertainty. So if you want to leave the EU, vote for the Conservatives. At least they'll provide some level of certainty and conclusion to the affair. But if you want to remain in the EU, if you care about the free movement of people, about our economic relationships, then voting Lib Dem is the only way to guarantee that. The important thing here is not to vote Labour. But secondly, onto what a post-Brexit Labour government would do. Because we heard a lot about the previous speaker about wage slavery and about how Labour will cut the working week and how they will transform our economy. And I think the important thing to note here is that over the last 150 years, as a result of kind of state-led or liberal capitalism, let's say, the average working week in the UK has reduced from 70 hours per week to around 35 at most. That's a huge reduction in the amount of wage slavery, as you would put it, that has happened as a result of capitalism. I would suggest that it will go further. But I think the important thing to note is this, that the Liberal Democrats are the only party with a sensible and fiscally responsible economic programme. Because there's no point promising unlimited spending programs unless there's a vaguely functional way to pay for them without burdening future generations. Just today, the Institute for Fiscal Studies attacked the Labour manifesto for not being a properly credible prospectus. And let's look at why this is the case. Because substantial increases in taxation, substantial increases in the size of the state, is likely to hit consumers in the long run as a result of less investment and innovation. Expropriating shares without compensation, as Labour Party suggested, is likely to terrify investors, reducing low investment and less growth in the future. The fact is this: a strong economic foundation with healthy tax receipts is the only way to fund the necessary social programs that can reduce inequality and poverty. But let's finally look, and this is, I think, one of the most important things, at the lack of moral leadership at the heart of the Labour Party that condemns the party to opposition. The combination of 9 MPs resigning from the party, the ECHR inquiry, the deluge of grassroots complaints, should leave no one in any doubt that Labour has very serious problems with anti-Semitism. But the most insidious part of this sorry affair is the lack of any adequate response from the Labour Party. The refusal to supply evidence requested by the Independent Equality and Human Rights Commission to allow it to carry out its inquiry is symptomatic of a party that cannot admit its own sins. Its decision to then undermine that very body for daring to disagree with it is similar to that. Look, I'm not going to try and pretend that any party here is perfect. They are deeply flawed entities. But the fact is this: the Labour Party, embroiled in anti-Semitism, failing to provide the moral or political leadership on the biggest issues of the days, do not deserve our votes. So proud to oppose.
Thank you, Cary, for your speech. We will now be moving to floor speeches. Would anyone like to make a speech in proposition of the motion? Should we go for there? Please state your name and college for the records, please.
I'm Studebaker, Queens College, aging PhD student. The Lib Dems, you people don't care. You don't give a rat's rump about Brexit. You're splitting the vote. You're ensuring that the Conservatives win, just like you ensured they won the last time, so they can do more austerity, so that they can give the health service of this country to my president, Donald Trump. That's what you exist to do. You exist to split the vote, to ensure that the rich constantly dominate us and take from us everything we have. You people are rancid. Your party should not exist. How do you live with yourselves? How do you live with yourselves? I'm furious that you continue to sit here and stand in the way of what is necessary to prevent an utter catastrophe from happening. Do you see what you're doing? Look at yourselves.
Would anyone like to make a speech in opposition of the motion?
I think what we've just seen is quite illustrative of the anger in British politics now. I joined the Labour Party when I was 16, and since then, I've seen the complete transformation of a once great political party into a narrow, hateful sect of the like-minded. I've seen a party that was described by the opening speaker for the proposition as the moral choice drive out a 9 months pregnant Jewish female member of parliament by a process of what the deputy leader of the Labour Party called racist bullying. I've seen 2 members of parliament, both of who I worked for, hounded out by the toxic culture within the Labour Party. Now, I care about British politics because I care about the future of our country, but I also care about the future of my community. And I think that the words we speak in this chamber have consequences. I could also stand up and give an angry, loud speech that would be very applauded in Labour Party circles, but I'm not going to do that. I'm simply here to tell you today that if you walk through the I lobby tonight, you are supporting a party under investigation by the Equalities and Human Rights Commission, a body that has only ever investigated one other party, and that is the British National Party. If you walk through the I lobby tonight, you are supporting a party that is a toxic cesspit of conspiracy theories. If you walk through the I lobby tonight, you are going to aggravate the anxieties of a community in this country, a minority community already under threat. If you walk through the I lobby tonight, you are not only betraying our country and a minority community within it, you are betraying the once anti-racist traditions of the Labour Party that we should bring back. Thank you.
Is there anyone who would like to make a speech in abstention of the motion?
So my name is Mary Osborne, I'm at Christ College, and I also think tonight what we have seen is exactly what is wrong with politics in Britain right now, in that we have had no clarity from either side about what it is that motivates us to vote for a party, what would prompt us to vote Labour or not to vote Labour. What is our model of representation? Are we bothered about ideology? Are we bothered about policy? Do I want to vote for someone who I feel matches my ideology and therefore I trust them to make the policy decisions? Or do I want to vote for a manifesto that directly represents every single thing that I believe in? So from side proposition, we heard about ideology. I think we were given a very loose description of the Marxist dialectic, of how we start off in a feudal system, we move into a capitalist system where we have wage slavery, and is the implication then that we move into a Corbyn system, which is the final stage and the revolution? Is that what we had? I'm not sure. As far as I'm aware, there is nothing in Corbyn's manifesto, and nothing that Corbyn has ever said that suggests that he will get rid of wage slavery. Because to clarify, in Marxist terms, wage slavery is where you're alienated from your labor because you are only working for the money, you are not working for the joy of producing something. So that was the confusion on side proposition. Now, side opposition. There was even more confusion on your side. So looking at your policies, you seem very keen on specifying. So you gave us the very, very fine print of the Lib Dems Green policy. Okay. But you then said that because some people in the Labour Party don't actually want to leave, we can't trust their policy, which I think is actually very, very clear. So actually you're saying that ideology is more important than policy, and yet so much of your speech was about the specificities of manifestos. So I think what we're really searching for is some clarity here. Thank you.
Before we start our next round of speeches, Alicia, just a point, is the 1 minute, is at 9 minutes, I'm pretty sure, for this debate. The 9-minute mark for the 1 minute left thing. Yeah, okay, cool. Cool, great. Sorry, thanks everyone. Okay, so we'll now have the second speaker in proposition. Esinam Akyaa Osei-Bonsu. Esinam is studying an MPhil in environmental policy at Queen's College and is one of the union's competitive debaters. Esinam, you may take the floor.
Ladies and gentlemen, before I go on to the speech I had prepared, I would want to respond to the issues of anti-Semitism because it's a very personal issue for me. And now, it is very sad that there are people in the Labour Party that are anti-Semitic. It is very regrettable. However, that is not a reflection of what the Labour Party is. Why do I say this? Because over the years, the Labour Party has tried to deal with this, and they have dealt with this. For example, under the leadership of Jenny Formby as General Secretary, there have been more investigations into reports of anti-Semitism. There has been reorganization, expansion of disciplinary structures, and more people have been expelled and sanctioned due to issues of anti-Semitism. The party treats anti-Semitism with the urgency and the importance that it deserves. Recently, the Home Office, after investigations, came out to say that the Labour Party is in fact not an anti-Semitic party. Now, not to deny the problem, anti-Semitism is a societal problem, but is not confined to one party. And it must and will be fought root and branch by the Labour Party, as shown by the steps that they have taken. And that is what is important in today's debate. What happens? How does your party deal with regrettable instances like this? The Labour Party has shown that it is ready at every point in time to deal with such issues. Now, direct responses to the opposition leaders' speeches about how the Labour Party is dysfunctional, delusional, and unfit to lead. It's funny because we think that is actually a representation of what the Lib Dems are. Now, they talk about an ambitious climate policy. We're very sorry, but we don't think trying to cut emissions by the year 2045 is a very ambitious policy. And this is not just based on what the Labour Party has said in its manifesto. How do we actually know that the Labour Party is serious about environmental issues? We can look at their track record. The UK Parliament recently declared a climate emergency, which was led by the Labour Party, showing commitment to tackle the issue of climate change even while in opposition. Labour MEPs pushed through the climate package that first recognized the dangers of climate change and sets binding EU-wide targets on reducing emissions and promoting renewable energy. They have also backed efforts by Extinction Rebellion to highlight the climate emergency. This is a show of commitment to protecting the environment, and when voted into power, we believe that they can be trusted to deliver. Then he again talks about Brexit policy and paints the picture about we being Brexit neutral. We don't think we are Brexit neutral. We think our Brexit policy is fair and balanced. It's fair because it gives people the chance to have the final say. It does not say we want to scrape or revoke Article 50, which is an insult to the democracy we preach, because it ignores the fact that 52% of UK citizens voted for Brexit. That is not a democracy. What the Labour Party is saying is that they would negotiate. If they negotiate, they will bring the decision back to you, the citizens, so you have the final say, and that is what is most important. But aside that, the Labour Party has also shown a commitment to keeping strong ties with the EU in order to avoid a hard Brexit, which is bad for everybody. They ask us how we are so sure we can get like another deal within 3 months. And we tell you it's because the EU is already open to negotiations, because a hard Brexit is bad for both sides, right? Let me give you a vivid picture of how a hard Brexit is going to impact the UK economy. So it's no secret that the EU is the UK's largest trading partner. And then the UK is relied on for services such as lending, currency trading, insurance contracts, and asset management. With a hard Brexit, firms could lose their rights, which allows institutions from the UK to offer financial services across Europe. That is bad for business, it's bad for the economy. It means companies will fold up, it means they would have to lay off workers, it means people will lose their jobs. But aside that, we cannot forget the fact that 30% of the food in the UK comes from the EU. And without any deal, like with a hard Brexit, it means there will be a no-deal Brexit. With a no-deal Brexit, it means tariffs on imports would go up. A tariff on imports going up simply means prices of these foods, like these things, will become more expensive. We don't think we want to be living in a country where it becomes more expensive to be able to afford our basic necessities. But let's look at the impact on like the larger economies. Tariffs are set to rise by 15% if there's a hard Brexit. Housing prices will sink by 30%. The pound will fall against the dollar and the euro, making it more expensive to keep up with the prices of things like gas and electricity. At the beginning of the year, a joint letter was sent to Parliament from 150 heads of UK universities stating that a hard Brexit will impact them in ways that will take decades to recover from. They have said that scientific research will be undermined, ranging from new cancer treatments to technologies to combat climate change, because the valuable exchange of students, staff, and knowledge will be seriously damaged. Without any assurances about the UK's access to European research networks and funding, world-leading researchers will be lost to other countries where funding is not at risk. More importantly, the rights of UK citizens elsewhere will not be guaranteed. For example, their continued access to employment, the healthcare, education, and other benefits. We don't think that a hard Brexit is the way to go. But we also don't think your policy of revoking Article 50 is also the way to go. So call us neutral if you want to, but we think we're giving the people what they want. We're giving them a fair and balanced approach to Brexit, and that is what is very important in today's debate. Then they bring up the issue of increased taxation. And it's funny, because 163 economists have come up to back Labour's economic policy, because it targets high earners. And even in instances where, if we to believe them, it affects middle-income earners, we think it gives people value for money. We don't think people will complain if the government is providing them with excellent services coming out of the taxes that they pay. So this shouldn't be an issue. Unlike the austerity measures that these guys propose, we're proposing an economic policy that deals with the increased inequality that exists in society. And it's funny that he mentions the IFS, because Nick Clegg, who is the former leader of the Lib Dem party, has himself condemned IFS measures as reckless. We don't think IFS has any credibility in today's debate. More importantly, what is this election about? This election is about issues like climate change, Brexit, NHS, and increase inequalities, because these are issues that matter at the national level, and they have the potential to chart the future of this country. Labour comparatively has the best policies regarding climate change, regarding Brexit, regarding NHS, and the rising inequality. The first speaker has spoken extensively about the Green Revolution. The next speaker would speak extensively about NHS, and I think have dealt with the issue of Brexit. But in conclusion, on Brexit, on the economy, on climate change, Labour stands for all of us. On Brexit, the Lib Dems want to trash democracy, and the Tories want a disastrous hard Brexit. Labour wants a second referendum and wants to maintain trading ties with the EU. Secondly, on the economy, the Lib Dems want more austerity than the Tories, and the Tories will be forced by Trump to privatize the NHS. Labour wants publicly owned public services and increased funding for the NHS. Thirdly, on climate change, the Lib Dems and the Tories have reckless and very underwhelming targets of 2045 and 2050 for carbon neutrality. We think the issue of climate change should be treated with the urgency that it needs, and the Labour Party is the only major party that wants a fair and scientifically targeted, justified target of 2030. Vote for Labour, vote for us. Tories stand for billionaires, Lib Dems stand for nothing. Labour stands for the people and the planet. How was that?
Thank you for your speech. We'll now move to the second speaker on side opposition, Peter Hunt. Peter is a third-year historian at Trinity Hall. He won the slot through open audition. Peter, you may take the floor.
Thank you for your speeches, most of which I think are your maiden speeches in this House. And thank you too for the floor speeches that have been delivered, particularly my friend from Trinity Hall, who gave a very sensitive and I felt very restrained and respectful talk, and it's in that manner that I intend to conduct this speech particularly. I also welcome points of information from the floor. This fundamentally is a house of free speech. This is a house of free speech. Our role is to convince you, not talk at you, so I welcome your feedback. However, for the point of time, I only welcome 2 floor speeches lasting 30 seconds, so thank you. 5 years is a long time, isn't it? Think about where you might be in 5 years' time. Some of us might have jobs, economic slaves, you might wish to call it. Some of us might be married, and the medics among us might even have graduated. 5 years is also the length of time that the next government will sit for. So I put it to you tonight that we want a party that we know we can depend upon for that lengthy period. A party that has backbone, that knows what it stands for, and so can stand resolute against the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, which will undoubtedly come its way over the next 5 years. And I cannot say that the Labour Party at present is such a party. It's always important, halfway through a debate, to actually look at what the question is, a bit like a history exam, really. The motion before us tonight is this House would vote for Labour in Cambridge. It's not that this House would vote Lib Dem instead. My friend made some wonderful points, but he was just drawing out the Lib Dems as an interesting counterpoint to illustrate the flaws in Labour's policy. And I hope that rebuts my friend's floor speech as well. We're not all Lib Dems. I'm definitely not, I can assure him. This debate is likely to dwell heavily upon Brexit, which is the elephant in the room of the 2-horse election, to continue my friend's penchant for mixed metaphors. And I'm aware that the chamber tonight will represent a breadth of opinion on the matter. I don't wish to advocate any particular position on Brexit, but rather to advocate the need for a party to take a position on the matter. I'm sure we can agree it's absurd for me to stand up and say this, saying that a party seeking to form a government but lacking any position on Brexit is absurd. But that is the position, my friends, that the Labour Party sits in at the moment. Yeah, go for it. 30 seconds, please.
I mean, you may not like what Labour's saying, but I think they're very clear. What they want is they're going to negotiate their own deal, and then they're going to hold a referendum on it in which Labour will be neutral. That's perfectly clear. You may prefer a hard Brexit, no deal. I don't know what your personal politics are, but you cannot say that Labour doesn't have a position.
Certainly. In fact, that's very helpful because... That's very helpful. It's regrettable that you made the POI at that point in the speech, because that's exactly what I'm going to come on to. So the Labour position is clear, as you say. It stands for a second referendum. There are three big problems with that argument. Firstly, it has taken the Labour Party 3 years of political meandering to reach this position, whereas other parties like the Greens and the Lib Dems have stood firm for Remain from day one. Secondly, it is not actually a position. It's a promise to potentially adopt a position in the future, notably after the election. And thirdly, Labour, assuming it can actually reach a deal in 3 months, and bearing in mind it's taken us 3 years to reach a deal that Parliament rejected, it would have to be perfectly happy to reject its own deal. And this is where we come to the lack of clarity. My friend, the second speaker for the proposition, said Labour would not be neutral. You say Labour would be neutral. This reflects the complete ambiguity in Labour's policy. Corbyn himself, I am on the side of you actually, Corbyn himself has pledged that he personally would be neutral in a second referendum. So be perfectly happy to reject this deal that he spends 3 months potentially getting. I hope that answers your question. Now, the only reason for the Labour Party to have such a nebulous position is clear. I'm sure we can all see it. Labour is trying to retain control of the Brexit-supporting industrial north without losing the support of the Remain-backing metropolitan groups in the south. No, I'm taking them from backbenchers. How can the country vote for a party that is so clearly putting party before country, putting themselves before us, so to speak? Yes, 30 seconds.
Don't you think it puts country first to try to speak to everybody in the country rather than a narrow sectional elite?
Yes, I do. Moving swiftly on. Labour's economic position creates this very pleasant world. My friend spoke of fields flowing with milk and honey, but is it affordable? The Institute for Fiscal Studies, which is not the IMF, which my friend confused it with, predicted that day-to-day spending would rise by £98 billion, tax by £78 billion, and investment spending by £55 billion, which would cause public spending and borrowing to reach a peacetime high. Pleasant world indeed, but is it affordable? The IFS has today criticised the Conservatives for aiming to increase their public spending by between £3 to £8 billion in these areas. That's a mere 6% of what Labour is hoping to spend. Now, Labour claim, I haven't actually read the evidence for this, but Labour claims that their manifesto was fully costed when it came out. A few days later, Corbyn very dramatically announced he would give £58 billion to pay for, to compensate female retirees. Interestingly, who are a key demographic that Labour's trying to receive in this election. And this has made their pledge for a fully costed manifesto nonsensical, because Labour hasn't released any plans whatsoever to fund this huge increase in expenditure, £58 billion. And the director of the IFS, which is the independent Institute for Fiscal Studies, says that this pledge drives, I misspelled it, drives a wedge between coach and horses. It destroys Labour's economic credibility, if there ever was one, and destroys Labour's pledge to have a budget surplus. It's going to put them hugely into deficit by £58 billion unless they can find this money from somewhere. Why this economic game playing? Well, I'm afraid, again, the answer lies with party politics. Labour, as I'm sure we all know, has been consistently behind in the polls for the last 4 months, and defeatism seems to have infiltrated the minds of even their hardiest members. The tactic, therefore, economically, and with Brexit seems to be to cut their losses, promise big, and hope for a hung parliament, and leave a large Labour force in opposition. This is a tragedy for our country, a point that I think I don't have to labour anymore. But I also believe, that wasn't a pun, I also believe that this is a tragedy for Labour, a party with a long and noble pedigree. We can cast our minds back, perhaps now only in the pages of history books, to the considered minds of Attlee, Beveridge, and Bevan. Considered men who knew what they stood for, and so weathered the storms of public opinion to build the world and the welfare state that we appreciate so much today. Today, Labour has not only broken away from their anchor of ideology, but also failed to implant any fresh anchor into the bedrock of political ideology. And as such, as we can see and have seen, particularly over the last 3 years, Labour is drifting to and fro with the undulating winds of public opinion. Our last MP, Daniel Zeichner himself, rebelled 6 times against the Labour Party in the brief parliament that's passed. I think this shows the lack of unity, the lack of ideology that unifies the party. No, I'm afraid there's already been 2. 1 minute remaining, thank you. This is why I believe that, especially if you are a committed Labour member, you cannot vote for the party as it stands at present. For its policy of all things to all people, to paraphrase the second speaker, ultimately means nothing to anyone. The same argument stands for every member in this chamber tonight, regardless of your political colour, and indeed every person on the country on the 12th. Do not give your cherished vote to Labour. Support certainty and reliability instead. Back a party, any party, that you know will be standing up for you as much in 5 years' time as it is now. So I urge you, on the grounds of your good and your country's good, domestically and economically, to reject this motion resoundingly and to leave, as my friend said, via the door marked no this evening. Thank you very much.
I'll now open this debate to speeches from the floor. Would anyone like to make a speech in proposition of the motion? Should we go for there? Thank you.
It is incredibly telling how little mention the opposition has made of the only plausible alternative to a Labour government after this election. That is Boris Johnson. Boris Johnson and his hard Brexit, Boris Johnson and the cesspit of hate and Islamophobia and racism and sexism and backwardness that the Conservative Party is. If you choose to walk through the no door, you are saying yes to tank-topped bum boys. You are saying yes to watermelon smiles. You are saying yes to bank robbers. You are saying yes to letterboxes. You're saying yes to Grenfell survivors being too stupid, decline, thank you, too stupid to get out of the burning tower block. You're saying yes to the Eton boy who comes in, who already made a mess of being a foreign secretary and endangered the life of Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe. You're saying that person should continue to be our Prime Minister. I would love to live in a world where we don't have first past the post, where we can vote for the party that we most think is suitable, but that is not the world we live in. We have to get our heads out the sand. You vote Labour or you vote for Boris Johnson. Thank you.
Is there anyone who wants to make a speech in opposition of the motion? For there.
Just want to pick up on something that the second speaker from the proposition said. You spoke about how the mark of a party is how it responds to regrettable incidents within it. But just the other night, Jeremy Corbyn refused 4 times to address the issue of anti-Semitism within the Labour Party. 4 times he had the question put to him, and 4 times he flatly refused to answer. And I want to make clear, I'm in no way advocating voting for the Tories, but I want to ask the proposition, how can you advocate voting for a leader who has such a glaring blind spot when it comes to acknowledging, let alone solving, institutional racism within his party? Thank you.
Is there anyone who would like to make a speech in abstention of the motion?
I really wish I could say, I wasn't abstaining, but it seems to me that none of the parties have any sort of credible policy with regards to Brexit, and I wish we didn't have to talk about Brexit. I wish it didn't sort of cut to the heart of everything, but it seems to. NHS, jobs, police, etc., whichever sort of area of policy you can think of at the minute is sort of tied into this sort of nexus of Brexit. And whilst I suppose the people on the sort of opposition are right in saying that Labour seems to vacillate with public opinion, some of its economic policies are mere kind of, I suppose, fantasy, if you will, it seems to me that the Conservative Party has become just an inverted form of populism in itself. I mean, what it's really arguing for, especially with the no-deal Brexit, which seems to be being peddled around, especially with the Spartans, the wing of the Conservative Party, seems to merely be catering to wills of disillusionment, with the... and then again, the same sort of force of populism. But then you come to the Lib Dems. And the problem I found with the Lib Dems equally is that they don't seem to accept that their sort of Brexit policy is as much of a pipe dream as what the Conservatives and the Labour are peddling, and as much as they ignore the sort of groundswell of public opinion which has been feeding parties like the Brexit Party over the past 2 or 3 years, been feeding sort of the sort of increased narrowing of the Conservative and the Labour Party. And by voting to overturn Brexit entirely, you're only going to feed that disillusionment that I see in where I live. It's especially prominent, feelings of anger, outrage, and whether you agree with the idea if this is overturning democracy or not, you have to also recognise that people feel that. And with regards to politics, what people feel is often as powerful as what is actually happening. And so that will affect the way they vote. And so if you're voting for Lib Dem, you're voting for a policy which is just as out of touch with what people are actually feeling as what the others are. It's just as much as how the others are trying to exploit what they're feeling. And neither, for me, is a healthy form of politics. So, I'll stay.
We will now move to our last round of speeches. The last speaker, closing the case for a side proposition, is Dominic Bielby. Dominic is a second-year lawyer at Christ College. He won the slot through open audition. Dominic, you may take the floor.
Good evening, everyone. Before I start with my, dare I say, submissions proper, as a lawyer, there are 2 slight corrections that I would like to make. One, unfortunately, is that I'm actually at Corpus Christi, which is rather embarrassing because I have just been elected the JCR president, and I'm sure that Christ is fantastic, but I am indeed at Corpus. The second is to correct something that was said by the second speaker for the opposition. The motion before this House tonight is, in fact, this House would vote Labour. He did not note, evidently, that there was a change. We are talking about Labour in general, not necessarily in Cambridge. Not yet. Now, the 2 main challenges to the Labour Party, the reactionary Conservative Party and the neoliberal Liberal Democrats, would have you believe a falsehood about this election. They would suggest that this election is primarily about Brexit. Patently, it is not, but let us imagine for a moment it is, and I'm sure you'll all want to get back to our Brexit policy. I will return to that in a second. The Tories tell us that it is time to get Brexit done, that it's time for Boris Johnson, with all of his charming Eton bluster, to cozy Britain up to the United States in a trade deal that would flog our NHS to greedy pharmaceutical companies. Their approach will cause economic and social calamity. The Lib Dems, meanwhile, would have us revoke Article 50 and move on as if nothing had ever happened, as if there was no referendum, as if this will solve the deep divisions and socio-economic fissures which bubble in communities up and down our country. The idyllic vision presented is completely false. I don't know whether any of the speakers for the opposition have ever taken themselves as far north as North Yorkshire, where I am from. But I can tell you that the anger which is felt in those communities, whether it is justified or not, is palpable. To reverse Article 50 without a direct democratic mandate will make the anger that poured out of these communities in the original referendum look like a walk in the park. It is dangerous politics.
In what world does a parliamentary majority not equal a democratic mandate? And if you support electoral reform, why do you advocate for a party which does not?
Two very good questions. I would say, first of all, you're presuming that the Lib Dems will get a majority in the Houses of Parliament in order to do that. No, but I doubt that would happen. And indeed, I do support electoral reform, but I believe that with all of the other policies which are at stake, it is something which indeed should happen, but unfortunately it is not my main concern at the moment. I will come on to the NHS, which is my main concern, but for the moment I will get back to Brexit. Between these two extreme positions, there sits Labour's position, a clear one. Now that we know the effects of a no-deal Brexit, we are going to put the matter back to the people in a second referendum with a deal which offers a genuine choice, a deal which does not sell out our National Health Service, that does protect workers' rights and which does preserve environmental protections. It is the people's vote for which the Lib Dems for so long clamoured for, but now they don't want it. It rather tarnishes their name, I suggest, as Democrats. I will move on. Now, I'm of the opinion that there is no good way out of the situation in which we find ourselves. It is an unparalleled conflagration of political, social, and economic issues that will shape our politics for decades to come. However, I would suggest that it is foolish to claim that forcing through a no-deal Brexit or revoking Article 50 with no direct democratic mandate would be a better policy option for our immediate future than a referendum. Europe, it seems, as a matter of precedent, is a matter which is governed by the British people, decided in referenda since we decided to stay in the common market. This issue should return to them. If you want to sort out our relationship with the EU in the least worst way possible, then you should vote for Labour. Of course, as I mentioned, this election is not solely about Brexit. It is an opportunity to undo the horrendous, intentional, and hypocritical damage which has been inflicted on this country over the past 9 years by the Tory party and their governmental allies, the Liberal Democrats. The latter, in spite of their nice image change as some sort of innocent party, was at every stage complicit in the devastation and destruction which has been wrought on our country because they kept on backing the Tory party. It is particularly extraordinary that we should accept this new Liberal Democrats when their party leader, Jo Swinson, voted to increase tuition fees by £9,000, debt on my shoulders and your shoulders. No, thank you. She voted for increased NHS privatisation and voted for benefit cuts which have been described by the UN as harsh and uncaring. That, to me, does not seem like a party which is that much changed from the coalition. However, as was mentioned, the main legacy of the coalition which I would like to address is that of the National Health Service. It is an issue which is incredibly important to me and I hope to you as well. In my first union debate, I stood at this dispatch box and explained why I believe that we should consider the NHS a national religion. I reiterate that standpoint. To me, the NHS is sacred and it is not worth sacrificing for anything. To recount my story in brief, when I was 2, I had eye cancer. It was a traumatic time for my family. My family had already lost a son of a similar age to cancer years before. And I was cured. I was lucky, thanks to the hard work of our NHS staff and their determination. But what matters to me now most is that at every step, no matter what, money was no object. I was not collateral to a profit-making enterprise. Rather, I was a sick human being who was treated in dignity. and the medical arts were made available to cure me, irrespective of how deep my parents' pockets were. The NHS is a symbol of civilization. It is a symbol of our collective morality and empathy, and it is ours. It is not the free market's, and it certainly is not Donald Trump's. If you must.
I'm afraid I must. The manifestos of every party reject absolutely selling on the NHS. Indeed, the manifestos of the Conservatives, with whom I think you have in mind, promise the biggest real terms increase in NHS spending. The NHS, the Labour Party cannot claim a monopoly on the NHS. The majority of the NHS life has been spent under the Tories. Thanks.
And you're right. Of course, I trust the Conservatives deeply with the NHS, as I'm sure you do too. The party leader, Boris Johnson, is famous for his candour. I know that we can trust him with the NHS. I'm sure that you all agree. No, thank you. Now, it is not just the Tories that would have us sell off this greatest of institutions. They would have us believe, as would the Lib Dems, that the NHS is safe in their hands, but that is a barefaced lie. Our NHS, thanks to the coalition, is on its knees. 17,000 beds have been lost since 2010, bringing the total number down to the lowest in its history. 100,000 staff vacancies leave hospitals understaffed and existing staff overworked. Cancer targets and A&E targets have not been met since 2014. You cannot trust those that have run the NHS into the ground to rebuild it. Only the true party of the NHS, the Labour Party, its founder party, will do so. I think we've heard quite enough from you. Now, moving away from policy, it would be remiss of me not to deal with an important issue which has been raised tonight. The Labour Party is not perfect, nor should it ever confess to be. Our party has not met the high expectations which we set it, namely, this is with regards to anti-Semitism and its handling by our party. We have missed the mark, we have underperformed, and we should be sorry. Every Labour member should reflect on what has happened and commit to rebuilding trust with the Jewish community. I am personally sorry, other members should be, indeed our entire movement should be. I sincerely and genuinely believe that the Labour Party is the best placed force for political change in our country. We must reflect on that mission and do our values proud in the future. To conclude, I would like to ask you all to consider when you are standing at the ballot box who you will vote for. Will you vote for the party that has perpetuated socio-economic devastation in our country that would alienate the population with Brexit, or will you vote for the party that stands for the many, not the few? Thank you.
Thank you for your speech. We'll now move to the last speaker on side opposition, Freddie Poser. Freddie is a second-year computer scientist at Gonville and Caius. He won the slot through open audition. Freddie, you may take the floor.
So I get to go third, which means no one gets a substantive amount of time to challenge me, which is fantastic. But I'm going to try, unlike the other proposition speakers, to stick to the truth and to actually talk about what's in the Liberal Democrat and Labour Party manifesto. Because, like their shadow cabinet, they don't know what their own party is promising. You have already dropped your 2030 climate pledge on the back of union pressure, and you know you have. It is not in your manifesto. And special interest pressure is an absolute hallmark of the Labour Party manifesto this year. But let me start with something I'm even angrier about, and that is the frankly offensive point from the American gentleman that he made when he stood up there and he told me that my political ideology does not have a right to exist in this country, that I do not get to say I stand for the most vulnerable in that society because I call myself a liberal. Not a centrist, a liberal. I believe in the freedom of every human to live their own life and to make the decisions that are best for themselves. No, thank you. And I find it frankly offensive that you tell me I cannot vote, even here in Cambridge, for a Liberal Democrat MP because I might let the Tories in. I hate the Tories, and I would frankly rather see a Labour majority government than a Tory one. It's true. But I hate them both because Labour is full of anti-Semites. The Tory party is equally racist. No, thank you. It's equally racist in its own special way. The problem is that we are being denied a third-party choice here, and that is because of the arrogance of the left wing. The arrogance has been seen in all three speeches tonight, coming from the fact that you started off, don't even know your policy. You talk about unicorns like universal basic income without actually talking about how you're going to achieve them. You start talking about slavery and attacking the systems without providing real policy alternatives. The policies in the Labour manifesto frequently do not match up to the Lib Dem manifesto. And I do hate to bang on about the Lib Dems, because you're right. The motion is, should we vote Labour? And I'm going to make the point that we should choose who we vote for carefully. We should choose who we think is going to make the best difference. And the fact is the Lib Dems have the best chance on this. And it's not just things like Brexit. We've heard a lot about Brexit. It's not just the NHS, which is incredibly important, why the Lib Dems want to invest billions in the NHS. It's things like civil liberties. It's the right of people in this country to live the life they want to live. It's the rights of trans women in this country to be included in spaces despite transphobes wanting to exclude them. And whose manifesto here do we think includes a dog whistle to TERFs? It's the Labour manifesto that refuses to rule out the misleading interpretations of the Equalities Act. So we see, no thank you, and we see frequently that Labour fails to stand up to the most vulnerable in society. So now to my speech. Sorry, I got a bit heated there. I'll try and calm down. The fact is that Labour fails to look after the most vulnerable in our society, despite being the party that I would naturally trust to do so. It's true, ideologically founded to look after the most vulnerable in our society, I agree, but you're failing to do that. And you're failing to do that on multiple points, both in your policy and in your anti-Semitism issue. On civil liberties, it's the Liberal Democrats who have committed to end the bulk collection of data by the government, to end discriminatory and overzealous use of stop and search. Those are not pledges that come in the Labour manifesto. I read it today. We have better economic policy. We want to abolish business rates, to allow people to start small businesses on the high street, to reinvigorate our high street, and to stop landlords taking the greatest share of the pie. Labour have great headline spending commitments here, renationalise that there, but will your policy actually help anyone? No. No, thank you. Who needs a national broadband service when it's not actually started with a commitment to make anyone's broadband any better? We need policies that will help people. Politics is about helping people. It's about letting people live the life they want to live. It's about letting people be free. No, thank you. And people are freest when the government protects their rights. They're free when an ideology like liberalism, founded on personal responsibility and personal freedom, stands up and says, I will protect your right to do this. I will protect your right not to be spied on. I will protect your right to access the spaces for the gender you identify as. I will support you when you start a small business. I will support you through later life with a £10,000 skills wallet. I will make you the most productive member of society you can, and no thank you, and want to be. The Labour Party has many good policies. I don't want to attack the vast majority of their manifesto. I agree with your manifesto far more than I agree with Conservatives. But to tell me I shouldn't exist, to tell me with your smug face that I shouldn't be allowed to vote for a party that actually represents me, that actually wants to protect my rights, I find it really offensive. And the arrogance is seen in the United States as well. The left wing cannot accept that it's not a left, right, and medium beige centrist. It's left, right, and liberal. I am a liberal. I believe in personal rights and the rights of people to make decisions about their lives. No, thank you. We have had a lot of policy detail today. And there is a lot of good policy in all three manifestos, especially the Labour and Lib Dem manifestos, in my opinion. But I wonder why we are so drawn to voting for the Labour Party that seems to have monopolised the caring image, when actually the policy doesn't bear that out. They haven't been in power for 9 years, so they really have the ability to complain about anything. Yet on Brexit, they go this way and that way when they know in their heart of hearts they should be supporting Remain. Even your shadow cabinet cannot agree on what you stand for. You have committed to end free movement in your Brexit deal. What party that looks after the poorest both in our society and across the EU wants to end free movement? It doesn't make sense. The Labour Party manifesto is a contradiction because in modern times, Corbyn's ideology does not fit. Corbyn's ideology comes from a time where it was Labour versus capital, where it was left versus right, the great battle of the 1960s and 70s. No, thank you. But we have a third choice now. We live in a world that has moved on. We don't need to accept narrow-minded nationalism on the right or narrow-minded left-wing Lexiteer nonsense on the left. We don't need to facilitate on the biggest issue of the day. We can choose a better object. And I bring it back to the motion. I know this is a very important point of the second speaker on my side. The motion is we should vote Labour. My point is you don't have to. You can vote for a better option. You can vote for the Liberal Democrats, a party that wants to respect your rights. Yes, why not?
But again, you haven't clarified why we should vote at all. Are we looking to produce a majority in government that would help us? Because the Lib Dems are not going to win a majority. I may vote Lib Dem if I want to protest, but if I want to keep the Tories out, then obviously I should vote Labour. And if I want to keep Labour out, obviously I should vote Conservative. Could we have some clarity in this debate?
It's a really good point, and it's actually one of the points I support the Liberal Democrats. We are the only party fighting for real electoral reform, so you can use your vote to make what matters. But in this election, why should you vote Liberal Democrats? Well, the fact is, there are about 50 seats in this country where you really should vote Liberal Democrat, and Cambridge is one of them. Cambridge, we have no risk of letting in a Brexiteer Tory. It will be between Daniel Zeichner or Rod Cantrell. And I know the motion has changed, but this House, most of us have the right to vote here in Cambridge. Here in Cambridge, you should vote Liberal Democrat. No, thank you. But more generally, I will not be told that I'm a vote splitter, thank you. I will not be told I'm a vote splitter because we stand a candidate in Canterbury when you will stand a candidate in Brecon and Radnorshire, or equally close seats that are between that. This is an election, and as much as I want it to be fought under STV, it's not. It's an election. I will vote for what I believe in. What I believe in is fundamental rights for every citizen of this country. No, and what I believe in is fundamental rights for every citizen of this country, and that is why I will be voting Lib Dems. So to sum up, there is a third choice at this election. You do not need to be bullied by the arrogant left into thinking you are a yellow Tory or a scab or a traitor for voting for a party that wants to respect your rights. You don't have to choose between racism on the left and racism on the right. You don't have to choose between two distinct brands of sheer incompetence. You don't have to choose the least worst option, especially here in Cambridge, but it is true in seats across the country. You can choose a better option. You can choose the Liberal Democrats. Thank you.
Thank you, Freddie, for your speech. So now we're going to have the closing remarks for this debate. So firstly, a couple of thank yous. So thank you, obviously, to all of our speakers who participated in the debate tonight, the 2 competitive debaters, and the 4 people who were debating based on their perspectives. Thank you to the AV staff and the stewards for making this night possible logistically. And thank you, of course, to the members for attending. A couple of notices. So this week at the Union, it's week 8, but we still have events going on. On Monday the 2nd, we'll be hosting at 7 p.m. Grace Beverley, also known as Grace Fit UK. At 8:30, we have a union Christmas quiz. On Tuesday the 3rd at 7 p.m. we have a faith and fashion panel. On Wednesday at 7:30 we have a British Green New Deal panel. And on Thursday we have our last debate of term, the presidential debate on This House Believes Men Cannot Be Feminists. Lastly, there is an election tomorrow that is slightly less important, majorly less important probably. The union election is tomorrow. Voting opens at 8 a.m. and closes at 6 p.m. There are two candidates running for president, 2 candidates running for speaker, and 2 candidates running for executive. There are no candidates for diversity officer or for social science officer, and by-elections will be opening for that next term. If you're interested in running for any of these positions, please do email me, or most likely Gabriel, at president@cus.org. Normally this is the point in the debate in which I would indicate how to vote. However, I do think that this debate and what we intended to accomplish from it is not that people came out of this with hardened perspectives on their political party and what they thought was the right thing, but rather that people entertained different perspectives from different groups of people on the parties that we are choosing from in this general election debate. So feel free to walk through whichever door you want to, but we will not be announcing the results of the vote after this debate. Thank you very much.